Yesterday, the government made good on its promise to crack down on gangs, but will this just add added pressure on our already overstretched police force? Police Association President Chris Cahill joins us this morning. Good morning, Chris. Thank you very much for your time. Will it add pressure on frontline police?
Oh, look, it will certainly add pressure on frontline police. And, we've talked about the need to reduce some of the demand in other non-traditional police areas. But, look, overall, most police officers will be supportive of the idea of getting tougher on gangs. They've seen them grow, they've seen the harm they're causing, and they want to be able to get into them. So, overall, they'll be supportive of the ideas.
Does it put staff at more risk if they are likely to be in situations where they are now going to have to move in, say, at a gang tangi or a funeral, for instance? Is it putting frontline officers at more risk?
Yeah, I think this is the real challenge. How are you going to actually implement the law? There'll be times when police will be able to do it safely. There are other times when they'll have to apply a risk assessment and say, we won't act. And I think that's going to be the most unusual thing. It's a law that you won't be able to enforce immediately all the time. But there may be, when we look at the legislation, some ability to retrospectively seize those gang patches, and that may actually end up having more teeth. If they ignore the law on the day, police could go to their house at a later date and seize the patch, possibly if that's included.
Do police feel comfortable, I'm talking about frontline officers, do they feel comfortable that they will be allowed to make those calls on the day? You know, they're not going to get in trouble for not going and approaching a gang member because they're wearing insignia in public?
Yeah, look, police have a pretty solid risk assessment system, and as long as officers apply that, it's in the end, it's their individual choice, but I think they'll be fully supported. Look, without a doubt, we're going to have to understand the legislation, and then they're going to have to work through how best to implement it. And look, police are pretty good at looking at things and coming up with some practical solutions. So I think the challenge will really be getting through some of the court stuff, to be honest.
And we'll talk about the court stuff too. Actually, what is your concern there, really?
Well, I just think it'll be interesting to see how the courts interpret the Bill of Rights issues that this might create. I think, that's one of the big differences with Australia. They don't have a Bill of Rights, and normally the courts are reluctant to say simply being a gang member per se makes you a criminal. So I think we'll have to work through that and see what that means. But as I say, we've got to do something. That 1% increase in gang members over the last few years says that what we're doing now isn't working.
What about the smaller cities and the smaller towns, Chris, where police often have to have some kind of relationship of sorts with the local people who are known to be in gangs? Do you think it's going to put pressure on them?
Yeah, I think this is one of the biggest challenges in the New Zealand environment. I mean, if you're looking at what we might call outlaw motorcycle gangs that aren't sort of part of the community, they're simply there to make money, they're just criminals, full stop. Well, I think that they're ones you can target easier. When you're talking about things like the mongrel mob and the black power who have been embedded in communities for decades, that becomes a lot trickier. And that's going to be something that, so smaller rural policing, provincial policing are going to have to work through how they implement the law in those areas. Well,
we've got the Police Minister who we will go to now to ask about that. Thank you very much for your time. Police Association President Chris Cahill. Turning now to our story about the government's crackdown on gangs. We're joined by the Minister of Police, Mark Mitchell, this morning. Good morning, Minister.
Morning, Melissa.
So if I can just ask you to clarify what will be caught under this ban on gang insignia. What gangs will it apply to, first of all?
Well, we have a national gang list, so it'll be those gangs, and to be a gang you have to be more than 5 people, and you have to have a common name, and you have to be involved in criminal activity. So that's sort of some of the qualifying aspects of it. And of course, if they're out in public wearing a gang patch or gang insignia, whether it be a swastika or bulldogs or whatever else they might choose to wear to intimidate the public, then under this law they're no longer able to do that.
How about gang colours? Does it extend to that?
No, it doesn't extend to colours, and if they want to wear a red or blue T-shirt around, they can do that. But they're not going to be wearing gang patches with gang insignia, around the public. They intimidate people.
What about the suggestion that it would increase the use of gang tattoos? Do you worry about that?
Well, the gangs came out last year and they've been making lots of threats, and I think that highlights exactly why we're clamping down on the gangs, because they think they're above the law. They think they can do what they like. And they indicated that they would defeat this policy by having their gang insignia on their faces with tattoos. Well, I mean, we'll wait and see whether they do that, and if they do, then we'll have a response for it.
What is your message to someone with or thinking of getting a gang tattoo?
Well, I just encourage them not to do that. I think that all it does is reinforce for us that they're trying to use that gang insignia to intimidate members of the public, and that's exactly what they do.
How confident are you that these changes are going to get past the legal threshold, that they're going to be ruled illegal according to human rights law?
Well, I mean, our Attorney General, Judith Collins, will be looking at that and providing a report to the legislation. So we'll wait and see what that report says.
Do you think that this is going to put extra pressure on frontline staff?
No, I don't. I think that, look, frontline staff have always had the discretion and the ability to be able to apply the law safely and judiciously, and have their, and it's no different with this legislation. I mean, you know, I had a police career where I worked by myself for 10 years, so I'd make the decision whether or not I'd apply the law then, or we might come back with numbers and reinforce it later. This is no different.
And do you think that that is potentially the approach that they would have to take in, say, smaller towns, regional cities?
I mean, smaller towns have got different tactical considerations, obviously, because they have less staff than in relation to the big centres, because they have big squads that are able to mobilise and able to deal with things quickly. So, yes, that is the case, but the reality is we have a search warrant power inside that legislation, and if a police officer working in a town by himself and the gangs refuse to comply with him, which, by the way, the gangs feel at the moment that they can refuse to comply with our laws, not like every other law-abiding citizen in our country that does actually stick to the laws. But if they continue to break the law, then there's other ways of being able to deal with that.
In Western Australia, obviously they've had similar kinds of laws in action over the last few months, and they are saying that there has been a concern around the cost to taxpayer as these challenges to fines and charges move through court. So a lawyer is saying that for the sake of a few $100s in fines, it's tying up court time, magistrates, witnesses, from people who are going in and challenging these charges of wearing gang insignia in public. How will you stop that happening here?
Well, I think that the law is very clear. If you wear a gang patch or insignia in public, you're breaking the law, and the police have got the right to be able to take that gang patch or remove the insignia. But look, police have got discretion in terms of how they apply the law. There's a fining system there. There's you know, they can also go to jail for up to 6 months. But the reality of it is the police will decide how they operationalise it. They've always had discretion. They'll continue to use their discretion. And the feedback that I've had from the Western Australian legislation, from both the Attorney General, the Minister of Police and the Commissioner, is that it has been very effective in breaking up and suppressing the gangs.
Are you concerned, though, about the flow-on effects into court? Because if they challenge it, then that's tying up court time, it's tying up, well, potentially there's a cost to the taxpayer.
Look, the reality of it is, unfortunately, our courts, we've got a backlog now. As the incoming government, we're trying to sort that out and figure out how to deal with that. But the reality of it is, we've said that we are prioritising public safety. So if people need to be in jail to make the public safer, that is what we're going to do. That is the first consideration.
Minister of Police Mark Mitchell, appreciate your time. Thanks very much for being with us this morning.